Hello everyone. In this video I'll be speaking about the ego, the sense of self or self-concept, as well as the meaning that we give to experiences in our life in this realm of duality. Looking at the concept of the ego from a spiritual psychology framework, we're going to see that the ego is just our sense of individuated self. So this awareness of having a self that exists relative to others, relative to the world around us. If we're going through life in this physical reality, we're going to have some sense of self, since we have to interact with our environment, both our physical environment and our social environment. So the ego isn't something that's bad. It's not something that's negative that we need to remove or eliminate. It's something that kind of functions to help us navigate the world. Yet at the same time, if we don't have that ego sense of self in harmony or in congruence with a spiritual awareness, with a more expanded understanding of who we are, then we tend to go into different polarized dynamics, various distortions and defense mechanisms, where the ego seemingly runs amok and takes over our life, or it leads us to act in dysfunctional ways. So as we aspire to be healthier, more spiritually aware, more self-actualized beings, we want to understand how our ego is functioning, how we are responding to our life experiences. We can think of some examples that give us an idea of what are some of the fundamental strategies of the ego, of how it will protect the self, of how it will seek to create this self-concept of being good or right relative to the idea of being bad or wrong. If we exist in this dualistic life experience, we tend to look at things in those ways as right or wrong, good or bad, positive or negative. So we naturally want to look at ourselves in a positive light, to think or feel good about who we are. And by extension of that, we want to think positively or feel good about other people or groups that we feel are connected to us, whether it's our parents, our family, our culture, our religion, our work peers, our school peers. So any social system that we may be a part of, we kind of feel connected to that. And if there's something negative about that, we might feel it reflects negatively on us. We may internalize it. And conversely, if there's something that we see as positive about those other people or groups, and we feel connected to them, then we internalize that positive feeling, that sense that we are good because that group or that person we're associated with is good. This begins really from the time that we're born. In childhood, we're very connected to our parents and caretakers, so we tend to idealize them or idolize them. We want to think of them or see them as good or positive, since when we see them that way, we feel good, we feel positive about ourselves. You'll often see children saying, oh, how wonderful their parents are. especially when they're talking to other children, trying to make themselves feel better than their peers in some way. Parents, of course, do the same thing. Parents are often bragging about how great and wonderful their own children are, which of course makes them feel good, especially if they can show other people how great, how successful their children appear to be. So we have this natural bias toward wanting to see the positive, toward wanting to think of ourselves and those that we're connected to as good. Consequently, if based upon whatever beliefs or values we have, something arises that would appear to be bad or negative from our perspective, such as we're not good at something in terms of academics or athletics, if we make some mistakes, if we get caught doing something that's socially inappropriate, we tend to deny those things or cover them up. We don't want other people to see it, and we may not want to see or recognize it ourselves either. So we'll use various psychological defense mechanisms in order to maintain that idealized sense of self. There's things like denial, projection, sublimation, reaction formation, all those popularized Freudian defense mechanisms in psychology. And this is something that we do throughout our lives, whether we're children or adults. We tend to use different defense mechanisms to filter the way we see ourselves, as well as how we see other people in the world around us. It's not easy to be very neutral in terms of how we look at ourselves, to be fully open to seeing the entirety of things, to recognizing both the desirable and undesirable aspects of how we function in the world. If we look at how children respond to people who mistreat them, to abuse and neglect, we can see some additional layers of defense mechanisms. A child may, in some sense, blame themselves for what's occurring. So rather than allowing themselves to recognize the disturbing aspects of how an adult or other person in their environment is treating them, they may feel some sense of guilt or shame that there's somehow something wrong with themselves based on what's occurred. We may also see a tendency to suppress or repress memories of what has occurred. So people can form amnesic barriers, we could say, in their minds. They're blocking out their awareness of what they've experienced because there's something about that experience that they're not able to accept or process. People will sometimes block out the memory of their own actions, of things they feel guilty or ashamed about. And they may block out things that have happened to them, things other people have done to them. This is referred to sometimes as dissociation, and there's different layers or levels to it. Sometimes a person may fragment their personality. They may create entirely distinct personality or subpersonality aspects to themselves in order to not remember a situation or to have some alter ego, you could call it, to cope with that particular situation. So let's say a child was abused or molested in some way. That child may actually take on a fragment, a personality aspect that in a way mirrors the abuser, that becomes the tough guy, the perpetrator, the bully, and so on, in order to experience being empowered in comparison to the way they felt when that particular experience occurred, where they felt disempowered. So that defense mechanism is to actually take on the role of the perpetrator, to subconsciously seek to balance out that feeling of disempowerment with an exaggerated feeling of empowerment. This is why many people who are abused have the inclination to become an abuser, whether it's physical abuse or sexual abuse or psychological abuse. People who have experienced that, particularly in their childhood, will often act that out toward other people, and they may be doing that somewhat subconsciously or unconsciously, not really thinking about what they're doing or why they're doing it. It's kind of a reflex, and it's something that we hopefully can recognize and start to work on healing, so that those cycles of abuse don't perpetuate from one generation to another. Many of the social disturbances that we see in our society have continued to grow and expand because people are not healing things, and consequently they are acting out these abusive or dysfunctional patterns. And of course, the more people experience abuse or disturbing behaviors of that nature, then that adds to the number of people who may develop those types of patterns themselves. So from a healing perspective, from a spiritual perspective, we want to develop methods of becoming more present, more self-aware, more open to processing our own behaviors, our own thoughts, feelings, our own memories, so that we can release those patterns, so that we can bring ourselves into a state of acceptance or peace or neutrality with whatever has occurred in our past, so that we're no longer caught up in those defense mechanisms where we're trying to protect ourselves from feeling or recognizing what we've experienced. If we were able to observe everything in our life from a state of pure awareness, just as an observer, without seeking to in some way escape from whatever that experience is, without needing to judge ourselves as good or bad, as right or wrong, without fighting, fleeing, or freezing, then we can be more conscious, more present, more connected to our essence, to our own creative energy source, and free to act consciously in the present rather than reacting unconsciously based on the patterns that we developed in the past. We've developed many different patterns that we carry subconsciously, which at the time may have been useful strategies to deal with a difficult situation. Whether we learned to react by fighting, by fleeing, by freezing, by escaping through dissociation or through chemical substances or addictions of other kinds, whatever pattern we may have developed to cope with stress or distress, we could say. It may have functioned to some extent to aid us at that time, yet to live our lives fully in a functional way, we don't want to allow ourselves to be stuck in that defense mechanism. We want to be fully conscious, fully present in our life in each moment. We want to be able to use all aspects of our mind, not to be caught in just one half of our brain or our functionality, but to be kind of a whole in terms of our use of our consciousness. So to have our mind and emotions working together in harmony, to be guided by our spiritual awareness rather than be caught up in some survival mechanism. So this means that we really want to learn to look at things in our life from a more spiritual perspective, to be able to give meaning or interpretation to whatever we're witnessing or experiencing in such a way that we don't need to react from an escapist perspective, from a survival perspective. We want to be able to look at it more holistically, to live our lives more tuned in to the awareness that we are limitless beings, that even though we appear to have this individuated self, this self that may be threatened by the environment in some way, whether it's physically a threat to survival or psychologically a threat to our reputation, to our self-image, to realize that we truly are just a small expression of an infinite consciousness, a supreme being that really has nothing to fear, a consciousness that is both the creator and the created, the observer and the observed. To see it in the context of a spiritual being here on earth having this role-play experience. I hope that this presentation has given each of you some useful ideas, some insights into how you experience life, how you react or respond to what you've experienced, whether it's in the past or the present. And hopefully you can apply these perspectives in your life to be more empowered, to be more balanced and harmonized, more capable of interacting with the world around you in healthy ways, ways that will promote healthier relationships, that will help promote more clear thinking, being more in the creative flow, able to manifest the life that you desire. For now, I'd like to thank each of you for taking your time to view this video. For those that are interested in spirituality and holistic wellness and natural healing and related topics, I invite you to visit my website, www.phinsights.com. That's PHINSIGHTS.com. For now, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful day. Namaste.